Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Oxygen's dynamic slider. This is perhaps the most underutilized element in Oxygen Builder, and mainly because it takes quite some effort to set it up. One of the many challenges that a couple of users have with the dynamic slider is the ability to configure it to their heart's content, and it can be really tricky to customize it, especially if you want to have different types of slider on the same page. Let's say you want to have more than one type, or let's say you want to change the arrows, edit the pagination, or move the arrows outside the slider, maybe outside the container. So the way it is built presents a bit of a challenge. In this video, I'm going to show you how I rebuilt the dynamic slider to make it easier for you to use it, to customize it the way you want. Yes, we're still going to be using code, but I have arranged this code in such a way that they become like sort of a template that you can use to customize your slider the way you want them. I'm going to walk you through some of the most common settings that you would most likely want to change in the slider. I'm going to show you how to adjust the slider height, adjust the slider paddings, hide and show the arrows, position the arrows, hide and show the paginations, position the paginations, change the arrows. And then under the slider settings, I'm going to show you how to change the effect, maybe change to a slide effect or a fading effect, change the slide per page, change the slide per view, adjust the slider height. I'm going to also show you how to use multiple sliders on the same page. And I'm also going to show you how to use the slider for non-dynamic content. Even though this is a dynamic slider, you can still use it for a non-dynamic content. The first thing I'm going to do is to show you how the dynamic slider looks like, and then I'm going to show you the changes I have made to it to make it easier for you to use. Alright, let's add a section, and then I'm going to call in the dynamic slider. Let me just type dynamic slider. It's a composite element. The dynamic slider comes in with a default query. It pulls in the post on your website, and if you take a look at it, it comes with a default height, and if you expand this, you're going to see the structure. Okay, now what I want you to pay attention is the slider container, and that has a class of Oxygen dynamic slider container. And if you go in there, you're going to see that it already has a height, and that height controls the height of the slider. And then if you go in here, you're going to see the code, which has a few CSS and also has some JavaScript, actually jQuery. To be fair, it's not daunting at all. But what you have here is just the option to change the play speed and then to change the transition. So they're not really giving you the option to do anything else. And as a matter of fact, there is no real instruction as to how to do any other thing. If you wanted to change this slider, or you wanted to, put another slider, you're going to be having difficulties doing that. If you wanted to duplicate, say, this slider right now, if you duplicate this slider, there is no instruction how to go about it, because if you move this, let's say you duplicate this and you want to have two of them, and there is nothing telling you how do you go about having the two, because if you save this and then go to the front end, you're going to see that two of them are going to behave exactly the same way. So if you click this, so let's say you go into the script now, and then you want to change this to fade, and you change that to fade. Now both of them are going to fade. Okay, so now this one is fading and this one is fading. So without instruction, you don't really know what to do here, because there's really no instruction. And if you're a newbie and you don't know that this uses swiper.js, that you can easily go to the swiper documentation and take a look at how this is done, then you really wouldn't know what to do. And in some cases, even when you know what to do and you go ahead to create a new slider and attach it to the second one, the fact that they're using the variables, okay, for the settings makes it, just does not disconnect both of them. Both of them still are tied to the same settings. And another thing is, what if you want to have like a carousel, like you want it to be more than one slide in a page? Nothing really points you to that. So that is why I decided to rebuild this slider. The first thing I wanted to do was to make sure that everything is in vanilla JavaScript. That will mean a little bit more of code, but performance wise, I think it will be better. Secondly, the way these arrows are designed is such that you can't move them outside because they are right inside, the slider container. So you can't really move them. If you try to move them outside, they get lost because this is set to overflow hidden. So if I come here now and I want to move this, let's say I want to move this pagination. So I have this slider here and the color is white. Let's say I want to make the color black, and then I want to move the top position. So it's 50% now. So I want to move, I'm just going to change the top to auto, and then I want to move the bottom position to 100. So bottom, so maybe 100%. So move it outside. So you can see that it's cut off. You can't really place it outside. So those were the kind of limitations that I found, and I decided to make this video to see how we can overcome that. So I'm just going to quickly jump into what I did here. So what I did here was that I decided to break the code into two. And for the arrow and dot, I separated it. So I created the arrow separately. Now here, what I did here was not only create the arrows, but I also set up functions to hide the arrow and the dot. These functions are very easy to call. All you need to do is just to call that function and pass in your previous and next. That's all. So I have 3 functions for each. So for the arrow, I have 3 functions, and for the dot, I have 3 functions. And this hides arrow on mobile, this hides on desktop, and this just hides the arrow on all breakpoints. The same thing with the dot. This hides the dot on mobile, hide the dot on desktop. This hide the dots on both breakpoints. Even the CSS for the arrow and the dots are separate here, and here are just the default ones, and then over here I have custom styles that I've given some presets, and I've broken them down into arrows, dot, and slide. So because these are the 3 things you want to change, and you don't want to make the changes to these default values because these classes exist for all the other sliders. So you want to make changes to the slider based on individual sliders. So I created this like sort of like a template. So if you want to change the dots, if you want to change the arrows and all that, you can even change the type of arrow using some of these HTML elements. So for the slider, dynamic slider code, what I did here was that I gave some instructions. Now these are the set of instructions that just would get you started. Change the slider height on slider container class or ID. So if you check here, let's check here now, you see this is a slider container. So you can change the height from here. Now that is if you are not using auto height. Once you set your slider to auto height, it's going to override whatever value you set here. But I mean, by default, you know that you're supposed to change. So if I go back to the old one here, let me delete one. Now you see this is a slider container, and you can just change the height from there. But the problem with this is that this is set on the class, so it's going to affect all the sliders on your website. The fact that this is set on the class, I really don't think it was a great idea. I think it should have been set on the maybe ID, because this controls all the classes, all the sliders on the website. So it's going to affect it except they are being overridden by an ID. Now the second one is set auto height to true to ignore the slider height value. Then another thing about the slider is that if you set the left and right, paddings, let's say you have a slider like this and you want to set the left and right paddings, it's just going to throw off the whole slider. It's going to just ruin the layout. So what I found out that if you want to set the left and right paddings, don't actually use the paddings. So to set it, set the slider inner wraps max width, then margin left and right auto. Now let me show you what I mean here. Now I have this slider, and I'm gonna quickly just, okay, let's say I have this slider. See how this slider is? Everything is perfectly aligned. Okay, you have this here, you have this here. Maybe I should go to the normal one. Okay, so I'm gonna come here now, and let's assume I have, let's say, some text, and I had a lot of text inside there. Let's just say I had something inside there like that, and then I need the padding. So normally you want to go in there and set your padding. So let me just set it to 3 rem all around. Now, so already you're seeing what is happening here. So if I save that, and then I'm going to go to the front and just refresh. Now you can see that it looks like everything is okay, right? But the problem is that you see you have these arrows here, but let's increase that padding to just to take, something away from that. So I'm going to refresh that. Now you can see that increasing that just shifts the whole thing in. And worst of all, if we go into that code and add, it says slides per view, actually slides per view, and then I choose 3, I'm going to save that, and then we'll take a look at the front end and see how it looks. So now I want to have 3 slides per view. And of course I can't have it because I'm using the fading effect, so I have to change this fading effect to slide. And then I also want to have a space between them. And to have a space between them, I need to have, so I'm going to have the space between. Now I want it to be, let's say 20. So that's like 20 pixel space between. Now I'm going to take a look at the front end and see what happens. So if we refresh this, you're going to see that everything is messed up. So you can see that you have 2, and then, just very inconsistent sliding here. So it just doesn't work because you want to have 3. Okay, we set to have 3. And so that's the problem. But if we go to this slide now and take away that padding. Now, if I refresh it now, you see that the slides are perfectly aligned now. You have exactly 3 slides per view. So now how do you have your paddings? Now, you really can't use paddings. Even if you use an inner wrap, you can't use padding. So what you do in the instruction that I've given here, what I did here was to give an instruction. I said you have to have an inner wrap and then set a maximum width for that inner wrap and then set a margin left and right. So now let's go there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just wrap this heading with a div, and I'm going to move this inside. Okay, now I have that heading. Now I need to go into that and set a maximum width. Let's say if you have more than 1 slide, then that means you're going to give it a class. Let's say you're using a regular slider, but this is the repeater slider, so we can just use the ID. So now I want to give this a padding, but I'm actually not going to give it a padding. I'm going to give it a maximum width. I can use 80%, and then I can set the left and right margin to auto. So that gives me that padding. So if we go to the front end, you're going to see how that works out perfectly. So you can see we have that. But what if you really wanted to set your value? Maybe you're using like ACSS, okay? You want to use maybe the space medium. So you could just say you have to use a calculated value, and you just have to do calculate 100%, then minus var space m. Okay, all right. So that looks to be working. So I want to wrap that again in another, like that, and then separate it times 2. So now you have the exact gap that you want, and this gap is exactly var space m, because you are subtracting var space m2 from the width of 100. So this is just the way you can have your paddings. And for the top and bottom padding, there's no problem. Those ones will work. So if I put 3, let's say 3 here, they're gonna work. So you're not gonna have a problem with that. But the side, anything that has to do with the left and the right paddings, don't set it on any of the slider container, because you're going to have some real difficulties getting this to work, because it's not going to work. So that's one tip I'm giving you now. All right, so let's jump in and see the other stuff. So to have enough top and bottom space for the slider to scale without being cut off, so set the top and bottom padding on the repeater element, the swiper wrapper. Now I'm still working with this. So for this one, let's say you have this slider, you want it to scale. So now you have this is a div block. Okay, so I want to go in here and I want it to scale. Let's say I just want it to scale when it is active, but I don't want to start setting up the active class now. I just want to scale it for you to see what I'm saying. So I'm going to set a scale of, say, 1.2, 1.2, 1. Actually 1.2 is actually too much. 1.1, 1.1, And for the Z, it's not really necessary to set anything. And so notice we are setting it on the slide because normally you want to set it on the slide. So check it out now. It may not really be obvious, but let me give this an outline. I'm just going to give it an outline of, say, let's give it a red outline to solid. Okay. And let's save that. So normally this is supposed to have an outline. So you can see that the bottom is cut off. So if you were to set this to scale, let's say you wanted the active class to scale, it's going to cut off at the top and the bottom. The only way you are going to be able to make that show is by going to the repeater element, and then you're going to set the top. And so I'm not going to do it on the class. I just want to go to the ID and set maybe a padding of 5 rem. Okay, top and bottom. So you have to go to the swiper wrapper and set the top and bottom padding. Now that is going to give you, see, I'm seeing this, but the bottom, I'm not really seeing anything in the bottom. Let me make the bottom bigger, let's say like 8, see what happens. So unfortunately, it's still not working for the bottom. So I really don't know why for this, which is, I think this is part of the reasons I had to do something about the whole structure of this element. So if you go to my own here and you see what I've done here is that I've set this to scale, you know, when it is active. Now let's take a look at the settings. So if I go here and take off this 3 and 10, and then I'm going to save it. So now you can see that it's cutting off that box shadow. I had to give it that background so you can see that. So let me go to the other one, and then I'm going to give it that same background color, or a background color, not necessarily the same. So I want to give it a background color so that you can see what is going on. I'm going to give this, let's say 10, padding 10. So you can see that the background color is not even showing up, even though we have set this on this ID. But if you go to mine here, still on the ID, you can see that we have a background color, but it normally would not show if you don't have the gap. But then if I set the padding, let's say this is 5, and save it and refresh, you can see it's perfectly shaped, you know, the gaps are showing. So you can see that the gaps show perfectly. Okay, so now that we have seen the challenges that we're having with this, let's go ahead and focus on this. So now let's take a look at this slider. What are we doing with this slider? This is my slider 1. Now, if you want to have multiple sliders, let's ignore this first one. So what I did here was that I took the code outside this container. The code was inside here. I took it outside this container. And then when I created the arrow, I created the arrow and placed it on inside this container. Now the default Oxygen's dynamic slider places the arrow inside here, which is why the arrow gate cuts off. But when I created mine using JavaScript, I placed it here. That way that arrow can stay outside the body. So if I come here and inspect and I want to move that arrow, so you see that arrow, I want to move the top, let's say to 100%, meaning it can go outside. You can see that it's not cut off. You can actually move it away. So that is one thing that that is the very first thing that I had to sort out. And also the pagination had the same issue. You couldn't move it outside this slider, you know, container. So I had to also move that away and place it outside so we can always reposition it outside anywhere we want. So that's the first thing I did. So let's take a look at the settings that gives us these multiple sliders. So if you go to the slider code, I'm going to open it. I have a couple of instructions are here, but then what I did here was, it's kind of very different from what you have on the normal one. What I did here was I just created a shortcut. I mean, you might see this and think it's jQuery. It's not jQuery. I just created a shorthand for document.query selector and then used it here. So now let me explain. This slider here is my swiper 1. So I changed the ID to swiper 1. This one, I change the ID to swiper 2. So every slider you're going to have is going to have a unique ID. So, and I would recommend you just call it swiper 1, swiper 2, and this one is swiper 3. So let's go to the swiper 1 now. For that swiper 1, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this code. So all you need to do is for each slider that you create and give it a unique ID, you just come in here and change this. That's all you need to do. So for this slider that is swiper 1, I prefix this with swiper 1. You see start swiper here. So everything starts here. So I select the previous and my next button and the dots using the swiper button classes and the pagination classes. And then I initialize the first swiper, which is swiper 1. And you can see I prefix everything with swiper 1. So instead of just saying swiper container, I say swiper 1.swiper container. And of course my dots here is now takes this value .1, and my previous and next button takes this value previous 1 and next 1. And then I've given a list of some of the most used effects here. So you can always change them if you want. And then keyboard, enable keyboard, autoplay. And then I've also added breakpoint. So if you want to change stuff per breakpoint, so slide per view means the number of slides you see. In this case, it is 3. And then slides per group. So how many do you want to move? So 1. So each time you click the arrow, it's 1 that moves. If you want all the 3 to move at once for the next 3 to come, you can change this slide per group to 3. And then the space between is the space between. So you have the breakpoints. This uses minimum width. So this says at a minimum width of 1200. So you can see that I don't declare this here. I declare all of them in the breakpoints. So in the smaller breakpoint, you have 2 slides in the, the smallest breakpoints. You have 1.2. So if I go in here and I'm going to just quickly just move this outside here. So now you can see that as I reduce this, you can see that it reduces to the number of slides. Okay, so we now have 1 slide. To start a new swiper, now I want to declare a new swiper. You have to copy the whole of this. So you copy the whole of this from here, swiper start to swiper end, okay? And then I paste that again here. And when I did that, I gave that second slider a unique ID of swiper 2. So everything will now be 2. So previous 2, next 2, dot 2. And then, of course, swiper 2. Then you declare swiper 2 is equal to new swiper. The ID is swiper 2. And let's ignore this for now. And then you have these dot 2, okay? And previous. So for each slider that you duplicate, you're going to change the ID and increment the number, and then go ahead and change those numbers where you have the numbers. And then for the third one, I did the same thing. You can see I start the swiper. So I have this comment to show you where it starts and where it ends. So the same thing, the ID is swiper 3, dot 3, previous 3, next 3. So that's what we have. So that's why I'm able to have different sliders with different settings, and they don't interfere with each other. You can set the arrows, like this has a different arrow, this has a different arrow, the dot, the paginations are styled differently. They don't interfere because each of them have their unique elements. They don't share the elements. So let's talk about hiding the arrows and the pagination. Now, you may have seen on my second swiper that I have this construction here. Now let's go back here. So to hide arrows, use the on event to call the functions in the arrow and dot code. Now, so this is the construction you're going to use: on, init, on, resize. So let's go back and check that. So here I have, this is the constructor, okay, on. Then when the swiper initializes, I'm calling this function. So I'm calling the hide arrow function. Notice that I'm on swiper 2, so I'm calling the function and then I'm passing in these 2 arrows, previous 2, comma, next 2. And then I'm also calling the hide dots function, dot 2, okay? And then this takes care of when you're resizing the window, because you need to call these 2 functions. This is on page load and this is when you're resizing the window. So on resize, I'm also calling the hide arrow function and the hide dots function. Now, if I want to hide on a specific breakpoint, I'm going to call the hide on mobile or hide on desktop. If you don't remember how this how this is written, you go to the arrow code and then you can take a look at the functions. You see, so all you need to do is to copy this, okay? And for the dots, all you need to do is to copy this just from here to here. You can see, so this is what I'm using. I'm using the hide arrow and the hide dots, which hides on all breakpoint. But if I want to hide on mobile, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now I want to hide this arrow. Let's say for this is my swiper 1. I want to hide the arrow and the dot on mobile. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to go to hide dot on mobile. So I'm just going to copy that. And then I'm going to go look for the hide arrow on mobile and also going to copy that. And then I'm going to go to my slider code and then I'm going to, now my swiper 1 is what I want to use for that. So I'll just copy this. I'll just copy what I've, what I linked here, that example. And then I'll come here. I will just recommend you paste it right after the navigation. Paste and make sure that there is a comma. Always make sure that there is a comma. Like this should also have a comma. So those commas are very necessary. You need to have a comma after, each of those stuff. Now I want to put my hide arrow on mobile function. I've already copied it. So hide arrow on mobile. And then I want to also, on resize, I want to hide arrow on mobile. And then I want to also put the hide dot on mobile. And here I also want to put hide dot on mobiles. We have to just pass in the previous one. So I'm just going to put one here. I'm going to put one here. I'm going to put one here. I'm going to put one here. Because we want to target the element that are specific to this swiper 1. So that seems to be okay. The colors are not giving me confidence. Let me see. Yep. Yeah, the colors look similar. Alright. Okay, so I'm going to save that now. So notice this is how it is now. We want to hide it on mobile like we have already said. Now, if I refresh this, you can see that we still have this. Something is wrong. Yeah. Okay, so I've seen I made a mistake here. This is dots. You see, no A's. So please, please, please. I think what I should do is I will go in to change that that dot. Okay, so I'm going to go in here so that you can just copy it and use without worrying about it. So the dots, I think I should just put dots here. Dots, okay, dots. Dots, 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 dot. Alright, so that should work for now. That should work. Alright, so you see this works. Now when we go responsive, you can see we still have the arrow, but as we resize, you can see the arrow goes away. You can see, so that goes away. You don't really need to go in to do display none and all of that. So you just put that function and it takes care of the arrows. So I have updated these, so we are not going to have any more problems. So this is updated. So if you want to hide only the arrow and show the dot, you don't need to put this. So you understand what I mean. So for the effects, you see you have different kinds of effect, but yeah, just take note that some effects, like you can't expect to have fading for this when you have 3 stuff. Okay, so sliding is most likely what you want to go for, or you can go for maybe cover flow. Let's see how that looks. I'm gonna save that, and then let's see how cover flow looks. But you want to keep things simple, so sliding is basically maybe kind of things you need. So you have that cover flow. Doesn't really work with some settings, so you might want to adjust. I don't think that will work for that, what I did there. I had that scaling effect, so the cover flow wouldn't work with that. So I'm just going to undo that. Let's see if we can put the cover flow in this one. So I'm going to come here, which that was swiper 2, and then I'm going to use the cover flow here. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to show you how to run the infinite slider, so you can see how the cover flow works. It looks good. Some trade-off is not really having that corner radius, okay, the border radius. But then, and it's also cutting off at the top because of this. So to fix that cutting off, we remember what we did. You go to that swiper. I want to do it on the class. You go there and let me increase the padding. Let's say 3, and then I'm going to save it and we'll refresh the front end. Refresh the front end, and then you can see we have enough space for it to play with. Nothing is cutting off. So this actually looks good. And so you might want to make your corners, you might want to make it like straight corners, because I'm not quite sure how to solve this. I've never looked into it. Now, how do you have this, infinite scroll like this? So I'm going to show you. Now, this is my swiper. This is my swiper 2. So I'm going to go into that code and let's take a look at the settings for swiper 2. So this is our swiper 2. Now, the first thing you want to do to have that is to make sure that you increase your speed. Now, the higher the number, the slower. Okay, so you want to increase it to like 5,000 or 6,000, and then under autoplay you want to set the delay to 0. And then when you do that, now I'm going to go to the CSS. Now for infinite scroll, I've already labeled it here. So for this, I have to choose the swiper2.swiper, and then this is just what you need to change the transition timing function to linear. So this code is available for you to use and apply to any of the swiper. If you are not using it, you comment it out. That's all you need to do. Now if I want this to move maybe faster or slower, all I need to do is to come into that code here for a swiper 2, okay, and then for the speed, remember, the lower the faster. So if I want it to be faster, I can use 2000, and 2000 will make it really fast. The higher, the slower. So I'm going to refresh this, and you're going to see how fast it moves. You can see it's moving really fast. Alright, so I want it to be slow, so I'm just going to make it like, say, 7000, and then it's going to be slow. So let's refresh that and see how slow it is. Okay, so the next thing is, how do you change the arrows? How do you change? See, I have a different arrow here, and I can easily have. So we're going to go ahead and change this arrow. Now to change the arrow, in the arrow and dots code, you can see that I have, you can see under arrows. So any of the swiper, like for swiper 2, I have a different arrow. Okay, so this, I think I hit the arrow. So let's go to this one, which is a swiper 1. So for swiper 1, this is swiper 1. Under swiper 1, I don't have anything on the arrow. So I'm going to go ahead and just come here and copy this. So that is for the arrow. So I should name this, I should call this arrow type, and then here to here takes care of the positioning. So arrow position. Okay, so I can just quickly just give that. This is going to be arrow type. Okay, so I want to copy this to the swiper 1, and then if I save it, you will see that it's going to have the same arrow. So this is the arrow we currently have. So if I refresh this right now, yep, nothing is happening there. Why not? Because we have not changed this to swiper 1. So I'm just going to change that to 1. Always remember to change the prefix to 1. So you can see that I have, a different arrow there. Now, how do I get this? How did I get this code? So if you go to, you type HTML entities, there's this side that top tile. Okay, now under you see arrows, you'll see different types of arrows. So I'm going to choose one really funky arrow. What you want to pay attention to is the ones that have the left and the right. Okay, because some of them don't have. So I want to take this. So this has left and right. So for previous, I want to copy this. You're copying this last one. This is a CSS content code. So I'm copying that. I'm going to go to there and paste. So for the previous, I'm pasting this one. So this is previous. So I'm pasting this here. And then for the next, which is this, I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to paste it on the next. You see this next. Now this second selection takes care of the RTL screen, that's the right to left screen users. So don't mind that it uses previous here, but you're looking at the first one here. So this is previous and next. So I'm going to save that, and let's take a look at the arrow and see. So I'm going to refresh that, and you can see that my arrow has changed. Now what if I wanted to reposition this arrow? So it's very simple. If you want to reposition the arrow, well, I'm not going to say it's very simple, but I'm just going to show you how you can walk around. You need to know a little bit of CSS to be able to do that. So so what you have here is you're going to select, so these are the two buttons. You're already seeing their position here. So what you're going to do is just to edit this value and then copy it and use it for what you want. So let's say we want to place this arrow at the center, in between, on either side of these dots. For the arrows where you have both of them, the top, you want to take the top down 100%. So right now I have my top 100%, but let's say we wanted to move down a little bit, away. So you can make it maybe say 110% or reduce it a little bit, let's say 105, or 105. So it moves it there. So it's still working. Now we want to move them closer. Now what I want to do is for this side, I want to move it 50%. So for the next, so we are on the next. So we're using right. Okay, so the right, we're going to move it right position 50%. But then I want it to move away from here to this place. You could actually try to, eyeball it and say, okay, 41%. Yeah, I think that works. And then you go to this other one and just say, now for this one is that on the left. So you're using left and you can use the same 41%. And it's gonna, you see, now here we use 40. Yep, this was 40%. But the problem is that, but it's really not giving me what I want, even though you have the right coming in 40%, this one coming, it just doesn't give you. So what you would do is now, let's focus on this. Now I want to go to the pagination and just check the width. You can see the width is 162. Okay, so I'm going to go back there and just calculate. So I'm going to use the calc function and just say calc, open and close. Okay, so I'm doing the 50%. I'm going to subtract 162 pixels from it. So that's what I'm using. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to copy the value, the value. I'm going to go here and do the same thing. I'm just going to paste that value. So you can see that, you now have that arrow properly placed in between them because you're using that calc function to subtract, the width of this from the 50% and also do the same here. That way, now once you're done with that, what you want to do is so once you're done with that, so how do you get that value in? So you have to determine which value is common to two of them, and the one that is common to two of them is the top value. Remember, you're not changing any other thing. So you just right click, copy the whole of this rule. I'm going to use a notepad just to show you, even though there's a template in that code, but I just want to show you how you can do this on your own. So you just take away everything that you don't need here. And then since this is a swiper 1, you prefix this with swiper 1, give a space. Okay, do the same thing here, swiper 1, give a space. And then you're going to copy this and remove these previous. So for the next one, so next is the right. So remember that our calculation for the next is always the right. So you say right, and then you paste that calculation that we had, and then just duplicate this. This is supposed to be prev, okay, and this will be, that's the previous is the left. So now that you have your, I always like collapsing my stuff, like make sure that there's a comma. So now that you have this, you can easily just copy this and go to your code, to the arrow code, under where you have this is arrow type, then you want to have the arrow position. So I'm just going to call that arrow position and paste that. So you see I have my swiper 1 arrow position. If I save that and refresh, so you're going to see that the arrow position has changed. So let me just close this and refresh, and you see we have our arrow position with a new arrow. Finally, I'm going to show you how to use the dynamic slider for non-dynamic contents. The first thing you want to do is you can see that it doesn't have any repeater. So I've put like 3-4 slides here. Now what you need to do is to look at this structure and the only thing you're going to replace is these two. So let me just duplicate this. I'm just going to call it my non-dyn, okay, and I want to give it a unique ID of swiper4. So that's my unique ID. So what I want to do here is this and this is what I need to change. So I'm going to just drop a div inside here. So I'm just going to go drop in a div, and that div is going to replace my repeater. So I'm just going to copy the name here and paste here. I don't need to put the repeater part. I just want to put the swiper wrapper. Then come here and then just copy the class. You see this swiper wrapper? Copy that class and paste here. So that will be a new swiper wrapper. And then you're going to create another div inside that swiper wrapper. And then you're going to just take this name and put there. And also, what you're going to do in this case is you're going to copy the swiper slide, okay, class, and also paste it there. So now you have your new slide down. What you're going to do next is just to delete this. So I'm deleting that. Now, so I have my new swiper. The next thing I want to do is to select this slide. Make sure that when you select this select that swiper wrapper, and also always ensure that this is set to horizontal, okay. Make sure that that is set to horizontal. If it is not set to horizontal, it's not going to work. And then for the slide, you can let me what I'm going to do is to give this slide color, background color. Now my height is already set because my slider container should have had a height. Yep. So this already has a height by default. So I'm not a big fan of adding that height here. So, but already it has a height. That's why you already have this height, this slider container's height. But normally I would put that here. So that's why I use this to override it. I didn't want to remove that because all the Oxy slider on the dynamic slider, if I change this, it's going to affect any new slider that I put. So I didn't want to touch that. So I just overrode it here. So if I want it to be 300, I make it 300. If I want it to be 700, I can make it 700. And now I can duplicate my slide. And for this one, I want to make it another color. I will duplicate it. So I want just 3 slides. I want to make this another color. So I'm going to save it. Now, if I go to the front end, nothing good is going to happen because let's refresh. So you can see is there nothing is happening. Arrows are not working. Nothing is going on because I've not initialized it. So I'm going to go to the code, and then I'm just going to expand that. Let me go to where my slide, the next slider. Let me just go to my slide swiper 1. I want to get from swiper 1. Okay, this is my. I want to start from start swiper. Always go from start swiper, comments, and come to where you have in swiper. I want to copy that and move to the end of this under this end swiper for the previous one. I'm going to paste this, and it's very easy. Once I have changed that my this unique this one, the topmost wrapper to swiper 4, all I need to do is to go to that code that I just copied. That's the last code that I just copied, and start changing every prefix to 2. So this will be 2, this will be 2, this, did I say 2? 4. This will be 4, this will be 4, this will be 4, this will be 4. So I'm just going to change all of that. Everything that has a previous number will change to 4. Even the functions, remember, everything has to have the new stuff. So this is it, guys. It's the drill. So just make sure that where you have, the previous number, then most importantly, the new swiper has to be swiper 4. Okay. And then this also has to be 4. So those are basically just around here. So that's why I place all these things around the same place, so that after that you really don't have to do any other thing. And then I'm going to save it, and I will take a look at it and see how it works. I'm going to refresh it, and it works, except that I can't see my swiper. So let's check. What is it? So auto height, we set auto height to true here. And because we don't have any content for the height, it's not working. Remember, I said that auto height will always override that manual height. So also remember, if you have set auto height, so I'm going to set auto height to false, and I'm going to refresh it. So you can see now I have my slides, but these are not dynamic slides, these are just regular slides, and the same rules of the alignment, the padding applies to it all. So guys, I'm going to prepare this code. So what I'm going to do is just that I'm going to give it this code with one non-dynamic slider and one dynamic slider. So I'm just going to remove all my other swipers, and if you need to reference anything that we have done in the tutorial, you can always check back to take a look at it. And I will put everything that you probably would need, but I will comment them out. Okay, so that like this function, I will put it there, but I'll comment it out in case you don't need it. The breakpoints will still be there, and that's basically it. And you still have this instruction here in case you need to reference something. And take note, the CSS for the dynamic slider code, the only thing that you can change here is this, use it for your infinite slider. All other custom CSS are going to be inside the arrow and dot code, and everything is going to be properly labeled. Alright, that's all for now. But if you want to save yourself the stress and the headache, you're better off getting Oxy Extras slider, which has a lot of settings. You don't need to double into the code, and I have a video right here on how I used it to create a thumbnail carousel, so you can check it out and see, compare and see which one you prefer. Alright, until next time, have a great day.